The rain fell in fine sheets that morning, draping New York City in a haze of silver. The streets shimmered beneath the weight of early autumn drizzle, and umbrellas bobbed like silent dancers along the sidewalks. Ethan Bradford stepped out of his building on Park Avenue, adjusting the collar of his tailored overcoat. His days typically began with punctual predictability. Quiet, composed, efficient. But something about the way the clouds above gave him a slight pause. Still, he moved with the confidence of a man who had made his way in the world and didn't often stop to question small omens. His driver had taken the day off for a family emergency, so Ethan had arranged to drive himself for once. His black sedan waited quietly across the street in the private company lot. As he approached, his polished shoes tapping softly against wet pavement, something unexpected happened. A boy appeared from behind a parked delivery van. He couldn't have been older than 12, skinny, with tangled hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His jacket was several sizes too large, sleeves hanging low past his fingers, and his sneakers squeaked slightly as he stepped forward. For a second, Ethan hesitated. The boy had a wild, desperate look in his eyes, but there was something honest about it, too, like he was fighting against the impulse to run away. The boy raised a trembling hand and stood directly in Ethan's path. "Don't drive," he said, his voice low but clear. "Your wife asked someone to mess with the brakes." Ethan froze. "What did you just say?" The boy's eyes shifted quickly to the side. He looked behind him, then back at Ethan, panic edging into his expression. Without another word, he turned and ran down the alley next to the parking lot, disappearing into the morning rain before Ethan could react. The street fell silent again, save for the hum of traffic and the soft patter of rain on rooftops. Ethan stood still for a long moment, his eyes locked on the alley's mouth. He wasn't the type to be easily rattled, but the boy's words didn't leave him. They echoed, sharp, unsettling, like a warning not meant for the likes of him. He turned slowly toward his car, then stopped again. His hand hovered near the driver's side door, but he didn't reach for the handle. Instead, he took a step back. His instincts, usually honed for boardroom negotiations and reading the fine print of contracts, now whispered something else, something deeper. This wasn't business. This was different. He found himself scanning the area, looking for any sign of the boy. Nothing. Just people walking, umbrellas open, heads down. It could have been a prank. A weird one, but kids did strange things sometimes. Still, it wasn't just what the boy said, it was how he said it. The urgency in his voice, the way his eyes darted with worry, the deliberate mention of Claire, Ethan's wife. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. For a few seconds, he considered calling Claire. But what would he even say? Did you ask someone to tamper with my brakes? The idea was ridiculous. Claire was thoughtful, intelligent, a little distant lately, but not the kind of person who would be involved in something dangerous or irrational. No, there had to be another explanation. Still, just to be safe, Ethan called the auto services company used. After a brief exchange, the receptionist said a technician could stop by shortly to take a quick look. Ethan gave them the lot address, then slipped his phone into his pocket. He hailed a cab and gave his home address in Brooklyn Heights. The entire ride, his thoughts raced. He replayed the moment in the parking lot over and over. The boy's voice, his face, his clothes, the urgency, it all seemed real. Too real. Not the kind of thing someone makes up on the spot. Ethan tried to shake it off. Maybe the boy had confused him with someone else. Maybe there was a different man, a different wife, a different story. But how likely was that? And what would a child gain from such a lie? When the taxi pulled up in front of his townhouse, Ethan paid and stepped out, still distracted. Claire wasn't home. He knew she had a museum board meeting that morning. The house was quiet, and the silence only made the memory of the boy's voice louder. Upstairs in his study, Ethan sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the rain streak down the glass. He was a man of logic. He had built his life on rational decisions, clear goals, and methodical execution. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was standing on something uncertain. A message had been delivered, urgent, confusing, perhaps even misguided, but it was impossible to ignore. Later that afternoon, his phone rang. It was a mechanic. "Sir," the voice said, We did a quick inspection, and, well, you're lucky you didn't drive today. The brake fluid was almost gone. If you'd hit the highway, they might have failed completely." Ethan's breath caught. He thanked the man, hung up, and sat in silence. Suddenly, the boy's words didn't seem strange anymore. They seemed precise, timely, and terrifying. He stared out the window for a long while, trying to make sense of it all. One thing was clear now. This wasn't something he could just ignore. Tomorrow, he would go looking for that boy. Ethan woke early the next morning, though he had barely slept. The weight of the previous day clung to his thoughts like fog that refused to lift. The boy's voice echoed in his mind, clear, unsettling, impossible to dismiss. And now, with confirmation that the brake system truly was compromised, the warning no longer seemed like the rambling of a troubled child. There was something intentional behind it. But what troubled Ethan more than anything was a question that still lingered without answer. How did the boy know? He sat at the kitchen counter, stirring a cup of coffee he hadn't taken a sip of, his mind already halfway across the city. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the morning air crisp and fresh. Across from him, the kitchen's large bay window framed a quiet Brooklyn street, with the first hints of sunlight reflecting off damp sidewalks. Claire walked in, her expression still soft from sleep. She wore a robe and carried her tablet under one arm. "You're up early," she said, reaching for the kettle. "Couldn't sleep much," Ethan replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Too much on my mind." She nodded slowly. "You've been wound tight lately. Work again." Something like that. He studied her for a moment. Her manner was casual, her movements unhurried as she poured hot water into a mug. There was no tension in her voice, no sign of unease. If she knew anything about the car or the boy, she was hiding it exceptionally well. Still, Ethan didn't press her. "Not yet. I've got a meeting uptown at 10, Claire added, "and then I'll probably stop by the gallery." "Do you need the car today?" "I had the mechanic look at it yesterday," he said. "There was an issue with the brakes. Pretty serious, actually." Claire paused, tea bag in hand. "Really?" "Yeah, it's being towed in for more thorough inspection." He watched her closely. Apparently, the brake fluid was dangerously low. She blinked, then gave a concerned frown. "That's odd. I remember asking someone to look at it weeks ago. Must have slipped through the cracks." "Who did you ask?" "Our neighbor's kid, Lucas. He offered to check it out. He's into cars. Maybe he didn't really know what he was doing." Ethan nodded slowly. "Could be." Claire didn't seem defensive. If anything, she looked mildly embarrassed. "I probably should have mentioned it earlier. Sorry." "It's fine," he said. "Just glad it didn't lead to something worse." She leaned against the counter, sipping her tea. "Well, lesson learned. I'll stick to professionals next time." After she left for her meeting, Ethan stood by the window, watching her cross the street toward the subway. He still couldn't tell whether her reaction was sincere or practiced. He didn't doubt that she asked Lucas to check the car. Claire often turned to neighborhood teens for odd tasks. But something about the timing, combined with the boy's warning, made the explanation feel incomplete. There were too many loose ends. Later that morning, Ethan called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the day. He needed to find the boy. He returned to the area near his office in Manhattan, walking the streets slowly, his eyes scanning every alley, every bench, every entrance to his shelter. The boy had disappeared too quickly the day before, suggesting he either knew the area well or had done this sort of thing before. Ethan stopped by the garage where the car had been parked and spoke with the attendant. "Kid? Brown hair, thin, looked about 12, the man said, scratching his head. "Might have seen him around. Comes and goes. Doesn't talk to anyone. Do you know where he stays?" "Hard to say. There's a shelter a few blocks down. He might head there sometimes, but I haven't seen him this week." Ethan thanked him and walked toward the shelter. It was tucked between a laundromat and an old brick church, its sign faded but still legible, Hope Haven Center. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and bustling. Volunteers carried trays, a few staff coordinated services, and several people, young and old, waited patiently for food or assistance. A woman at the front desk greeted him. "Can I help you?" Ethan introduced himself and explained what he was looking for. "I'm trying to find a boy who might have come through here recently. About 12, short brown hair, maybe goes by the name Mason." She gave him a cautious look. "We try to protect the privacy of the people we help here." "I understand," he said, his tone earnest. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to thank him. He might have helped me avoid something very serious." She studied him for a moment, then softened. "We've had a few boys around that age come through. Mason, that name does sound familiar. Quiet kid, doesn't stay long, comes in, grabs a meal, disappears again. But I haven't seen him in over a week. Do you know if he has any family? Anyone he talks to?" "Not that I know of. We think he might have been part of a group that hung around the east side, near the train tracks. Most of them move around a lot." Ethan left his contact information with the staff, asking them to call if Mason returned. As he stepped back onto the sidewalk, he realized just how difficult this would be. The city was full of stories like Mason's, lost kids, drifting through systems that didn't know what to do with them. But something told him this wasn't just a random encounter. The boy had come to him for a reason. He wandered for hours, following half-leads and descriptions that almost matched. He spoke to food cart vendors, buskers, anyone who might have noticed a small, scrappy boy near the area. Nothing. It was as if Mason had vanished. As the sun dipped low and the city took on a glow of early evening, Ethan returned home, more exhausted than he expected. Claire wasn't back yet. He went upstairs and sat in his study, the silence of the house pressing in around him. He opened a drawer and pulled out a dusty photo album, one of the old ones Claire used to put together before everything became digital. As he flipped through the pages, something caught his eye, a photo from a fundraiser event at a local community center, taken 2 years ago. He leaned closer. There, near the back of the group shot, was a small figure, hair longer, face thinner, but unmistakably the same eyes, the same look. It was Mason. Ethan sat back slowly, the album resting on his lap. So they had crossed paths before. This wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. The boy had remembered him, and now, perhaps, was reaching out not just with a warning, but with something more. The next morning, Ethan found himself staring at the photograph again, now fully convinced that Mason wasn't just a concerned stranger. There was a past between them, however brief. At the time of the photo, the community center had hosted a holiday fundraiser, and the event had brought together donors, volunteers, and beneficiaries of the outreach programs. Ethan had attended as a guest speaker, shaking hands, taking photos, delivering a short speech about civic responsibility. Back then, he hadn't paid much attention to the faces and crowd, but Mason had clearly noticed him. Now, Ethan needed to know more. He called the director of the community center, a woman named Delia Carr, who had worked with his foundation in the past. After a few minutes of small talk, he asked if she remembered the event and the kids who had been part of the youth support group back then. Delia hesitated. "We've worked with a lot of children over the years. But yes, I remember the fundraiser you came to. A lot of the kids were from shelters, temporary housing, or family programs. Is there someone specific you're looking for?" "I think so. A boy. His name might be Mason. About 12 now. He was in one of the group photos from that day." He emailed her a scanned copy of the picture. Within the hour, she called him back. "I recognize him. His full name's Mason Riley. He was placed in our emergency support program for 6 months, then went into the city's temporary foster care system. Sweet kid, kept to himself. I remember he liked to sit at the back of the room and draw. Do you know where he is now?" "I'm afraid not. Last we heard, he was moved to a group home in the Bronx. That was a while ago. He might have left the system, aged out early, or ran off. It happens more often than we like to admit." Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling both closer and farther away than before. At least now he had a name and a history. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. He spent the rest of the day making discreet calls, tapping into contacts from his foundation work. One of the board members, a retired judge who had volunteered with Youth Legal Services, offered to help. That evening, Ethan and Claire shared dinner in their sunlit kitchen. The mood between them was polite, if distant. Claire spoke about the museum's latest exhibit, while Ethan responded with mild interest. Beneath the surface, neither addressed the growing sense of unease that had begun to settle between them. Midway through the meal, Ethan gently set down his fork. "Do you remember the community center event we attended 2 years ago? The one near Midtown?" Claire looked up. "The holiday one? With a fundraiser for the shelter programs." "That's the one." "Sure." You gave a little speech. "Why?" "There was a boy there. His name's Mason. I think he's the same kid who warned me the other day." Claire frowned, setting down her glass. "That's a strange coincidence." "It's more than that. I found him in one of the photos from that night. He remembered me." Claire gave a quiet, thoughtful pause. "Do you think he was reaching out for help?" Ethan looked at her. "I think he already did." They ate the rest of their meal in silence. Later that night, Ethan walked alone through the streets near the community center. He didn't expect to find Mason wandering nearby, but something compelled him to return to the scene of that long-ago photo. The building was closed, its metal gates drawn tight, but the streetlights lit up the sidewalk in soft yellow tones. He stood outside for a while, imagining the crowded event, the clatter of chairs and laughter, the paper snowflakes taped to the windows. He imagined Mason in the back of the room, small and unnoticed, sketching quietly while people talked around him. What would make a child like that approach someone after 2 years? What would drive him to warn a man he barely knew? Ethan didn't have answers, only more questions. The night was cool and the street was quiet. A distant siren howled and then faded away. He took a long breath and decided to walk toward the nearby park, where benches lined a quiet path beneath tall trees. He wasn't alone. As he passed under one of the flickering lamps, he saw someone sitting on the far bench, hood pulled up, legs drawn close. The figure was small, thin, and still. Ethan approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you Mason?" The boy didn't answer right away. After a moment, he looked up, cautious but not afraid. It was him. "You remembered," Ethan said softly. Mason gave a small shrug. "You look like you might listen." "I'm listening now." The boy nodded but said nothing. Ethan sat beside him, leaving space between them. For a while they just sat, the sounds of the city fading into the background. "You were at the community center 2 years ago." Ethan said gently. "I remember," Mason replied, eyes fixed on the ground. "You talked about helping people, about being present. You remember my words?" "I remember faces better than words," Mason said. "But that day felt different. People talked like they cared." "Why did you come to me now?" Mason didn't speak right away. Then he looked at Ethan directly. "I saw your car a few times. I sleep near the lot sometimes. One night, I saw someone messing with it. Thought it was just a thief. But then I heard them talk about your name. I think they were trying to scare you. Or maybe it was just a stupid prank. But I heard a woman's name, too. Claire." Ethan's heart pounded. "Are you sure?" "I'm not saying she did anything. I just heard it. I thought maybe you should know. People don't always see what's coming." "You shouldn't be out here alone," Ethan said quietly. "I've been alone for a long time." There was pain in his voice, the kind that no 12-year-old should know. Ethan wanted to ask more, to understand who had tampered with the car and why. But for now, he knew Mason had already given him more than most would. "Would you let me help you?" Mason didn't answer, but he didn't move away either. "I have people who can help. Real help. A safe place. School. Food. You wouldn't have to keep running." "I don't like staying in one place," Mason said. "They always promise things, but it never lasts." "I'm not promising anything," Ethan said. "I'm just offering." They sat there for another 10 minutes, neither needing to fill the silence. Finally, Mason stood. "I'll think about it," he said, and disappeared into the night once again. Ethan watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and worry. He had found the boy, but now he knew that the warning wasn't some strange accident. It was rooted in something real, and someone, somewhere, had wanted him scared. 2 days passed without a sign of Mason. Ethan walked the streets again, returned to the park bench where they had last spoken, and even lingered outside the community center, hoping the boy might resurface. But Mason was gone. It was as if the night they had shared never happened, leaving only the memory of their conversation and more questions and answers. And as Ethan wrestled with what he had heard, that someone had mentioned Claire's name while tampering with his car, he struggled to decide how much to trust the voice of a boy who lived on the margins of the city. At home, Claire remained calm and attentive, though something between them had begun to shift. Ethan noticed in the way she paused before answering his questions, or the way she avoided looking him directly in the eyes when they spoke for too long. Still, there was nothing concrete, no obvious reason to suspect her, and certainly nothing to confront her with without sounding paranoid. Instead, Ethan redirected his focus. If Mason had disappeared, then perhaps someone else had seen something. He returned to the parking lot where the boy had first warned him and spoke again with the garage attendant. "I already told you. I don't know where the kid went," the man said, shaking his head. "He doesn't hang around here much. Just comes and goes." "What about cameras?" Ethan asked. "Do you have security footage from earlier this week? Maybe from the night before he spoke to me?" The attendant raised an eyebrow. "We've got one camera that points toward the entrance. Not great quality, but I can ask the manager." Later that afternoon, Ethan was shown a short clip from the night in question. The image was grainy and dim, but it clearly showed a small figure, Mason, standing near the rear of Ethan's car. A second figure, taller, face obscured by a hood, approached the vehicle shortly after. They appeared to be speaking. Then the older figure crouched near the wheel well before standing and walking away. Mason lingered for a few moments, then vanished into the shadows. "Can you enhance this?" Ethan asked. "This isn't CSI." The manager chuckled. "What you see is what you get." Still, the footage was something. Mason had seen someone. He had likely heard something too, and believed it was worth warning Ethan about. But without the boy to clarify further, Ethan's only option was to start eliminating possibilities one by one. He began with Lucas, the neighbor's teenage son Claire had mentioned. Lucas was a lanky, soft-spoken boy of 16 who had fixed Ethan's garden hose once and mowed the lawn for Claire the summer before. He found Lucas at home, playing video games in a dim living room filled with the smell of popcorn and old carpet. "I just have a quick question," Ethan said after introducing himself. "My wife mentioned you might have looked at our car a few weeks ago." Lucas shrugged. "Yeah, she said it was acting weird. So I popped the hood. Looked fine to me. I told her I wasn't really sure what I was doing, though." "Did you touch the brakes?" "No way. I wouldn't mess with anything like that." "Did anyone else see you working on it?" Lucas thought for a moment. "I don't think so. I mean, maybe Mr. Harrow from across the street. He was raking leaves that day." Ethan thanked him and left with a heavy heart. Lucas didn't seem capable of or interested in sabotaging anything. And the mention of another neighbor, Mr. Harrow, didn't spark any leads either. If someone really had tampered with the car, it likely wasn't anyone connected to Lucas. The more Ethan investigated, the clearer it became that he was chasing shadows. Mason's warning had opened a door, but now that door seemed to be closing again, slowly and with deliberate weight. Back at home, Ethan tried to relax by sorting through files in his study, but his mind kept drifting. He opened his laptop and pulled up records from the Foundation's youth outreach program, hoping to find something, anything, that might lead him back to Mason. His eyes scanned names, intake forms, follow-up reports. Then, buried deep in a scanned intake document, he saw Mason's handwriting. Under the section labeled Emergency Contact, Mason had scribbled a name, Ms. Jolene, church lady, West 41st Street. Ethan's heart quickened. The next morning, he drove to West 41st Street and walked the block slowly, looking for anything that resembled a church or shelter. Halfway down, tucked between two tall apartment buildings, was a small mission church with a modest sign, New Grace Fellowship. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and candles. An elderly woman with silver hair was arranging hymnals near the front pews. "Excuse me," Ethan said. "I'm looking for someone who might be connected to a boy named Mason Riley." She turned with a kind expression and nodded. "You must be Ethan. Mason told me he might come find you. You've spoken to him recently?" "He comes here sometimes." doesn't always talk, just sits, sometimes draws. I've known him since he was 8. Do you know where he is now? She hesitated. He comes and goes. But he's not in any trouble, if that's what you're asking. He's just afraid of trusting the wrong people. I think he trusts me, at least a little. She looked at Ethan carefully, then motioned for him to sit. Mason has seen things most children shouldn't. He's not just surviving. He's navigating a world that has failed him more than once. You're not the first person he's tried to help, you know, but most people don't listen. You did. I want to do more than listen. Then you need to be patient. He's cautious for a reason. Ethan left the church feeling both hopeful and frustrated. Mason was still out there, still close enough to watch. But now the boy was avoiding him again, not out of anger, but out of habit. Survival had taught him to run first, talk later. That night, Ethan sat on a rooftop terrace of his home. The skyline stretched before him like a sea of light. Claire joined him, wrapped in a blanket, a mug of tea in her hands. "You've been different lately," she said softly. "I've had a lot on my mind." "Is it about the car or something else?" He studied her expression in the glow of the city. "It's about trying to make sense of things that don't add up." Claire nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the skyline. "I get it. Sometimes things go off course, and it's hard to know where to start fixing them." "Would you tell me," he asked quietly, "if there was something you were keeping from me?" She turned to look at him, and for a moment, the night seemed to pause. "I haven't lied to you, Ethan," she said, "but I think we both stopped saying certain truths out loud." He didn't press her further. Not yet, because as much as he wanted answers, the wall between them wasn't one built by malice. It was one built by time, silence, and the slow erosion of connection. And he knew that to get through it, he would need more than suspicion. He would need clarity. And for that, he still needed Mason. Ethan was alone in his office the next morning, the early light casting a golden haze across the hardwood floors. A file folder lay open on his desk, untouched for nearly an hour. His focus was elsewhere. The past few days had pushed him into unfamiliar territory, emotionally, morally, even logistically. He had built his life around structure, around knowing what to expect. Now, each moment felt like a new step into a fog. And yet, with each step, pieces of a much older puzzle were beginning to emerge, pieces he had long forgotten. He stared at the contact card Ms. Jolene had written for him on the back of a church bulletin. Beneath her name, she had scribbled a short note. "He talks about that old mural all the time." It seemed insignificant at first, until Ethan remembered something. Years ago, he had donated funds for a local art initiative that provided free mural painting workshops for underprivileged children. One of the final murals, painted on the side of a building near the East River, had featured contributions from a dozen children, guided by 2 local artists. It had been a bright and hopeful project at the time, one of many initiatives launched through Ethan's foundation. He hadn't thought about it in years. That afternoon, he drove to the site. The neighborhood had changed. What once was a row of dilapidated buildings now hosted cafes and boutique gyms. But at the end of the street, tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up storefront, the mural still stood. Weather-worn and faded, the wall bore the imagery of young dreams. Hands reaching toward stars, animals dancing through forests, cityscapes made of colorful blocks. He stepped closer, scanning the lower section where the children had painted their individual additions. Near the bottom right corner, beside a clumsily drawn rocket ship, was a small, neatly signed name, Mason R. Ethan exhaled slowly. It was real. The boy hadn't just appeared in his life by accident. Mason had been part of this world long before the warning, long before the car incident. And now, somehow, he was being drawn back into Ethan's orbit. Or maybe Ethan was the one returning to Mason's. A sound to his left drew his attention. A woman was standing near the corner of the mural, her arms folded as she watched him with mild curiosity. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "It is," Ethan replied. "They say it was painted by a bunch of kids from the old shelter nearby. My nephew helped with the clouds. Do you know if any of the kids still come around?" She shook her head. Some moved away. Others, not sure. One of them, Mason, I think, used to stop by once in a while. Quiet boy. Always had a sketchbook with him. You knew him? Not really. Just saw him sometimes. He'd sit across the street and stare at the wall, like he was trying to remember something important. Ethan thanked her and walked across to the small plaza, where a few benches face a mural. He sat down, trying to imagine Mason at that age, brush in hand, surrounded by strangers who offered artist therapy. He wondered what the boy had been escaping even then. Back at home that evening, Ethan pulled out a box of old records from the foundation. He hadn't opened it in years, but inside were reports, photos, and evaluation forms from several past outreach projects. Near the bottom, he found a folder marked Creative Growth Initiative, Year 2. Inside was a collection of student profiles. Most of the children had submitted drawings or short bios as part of their participation. Mason stood out immediately, not just because of the neatly printed name, but because of the sketch paper attached to the back of the form. It was a pencil drawing of the same mural wall. But in Mason's version, the wall wasn't in color. It was crumbling, with pieces falling off, and two small stick figures standing in front of it, reaching up toward the sky. On the back of the page, Mason had written just 3 words. It didn't last. Ethan sat back, absorbing the meaning. Mason had seen beauty collapse before. Dreams offered and then withdrawn. No wonder he was cautious. No wonder he ran. He had learned early not to believe in permanence. The next morning, Ethan returned to the church on West 41st Street. Ms. Jolene was lighting candles near the altar when he entered. "I found the mural," he said quietly. She looked over her shoulder. "Then you found part of Mason, too. He painted a part of it. He used to go back there. Sit and remember. He told me once that it was the first time he felt like someone saw him, not just another case or a name on a chart. I want to give him that again." "He's listening," she said, "even if he doesn't show it." Ethan left a small envelope with her. Inside was a prepaid cell phone and a handwritten note with only a few lines. "If you want to talk, no pressure, just dial." That evening, back at home, Claire was sitting on the edge of their bed, looking through an old photo album. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching her flip pages slowly. Her hands hesitated on a photo from a trip they had taken 5 years earlier, before the distance between them had begun to grow. "Remember this?" she asked. "I do." "You were happier then." "So were you." She didn't argue. Ethan walked over and sat beside her. The air between them was quiet, but it was no longer cold. "There's something I've been trying to figure out," he said, "and I don't want to keep pretending like nothing feels off." Claire nodded slowly, her eyes still on the photo. "It's not just you. I felt it too. I don't think you've done anything wrong," he continued, "but something's been building between us, and I don't want it to keep growing." "I've been tired," she said. "Not physically, just emotionally. I keep thinking if I ignore it, we'll find our way back. Maybe it's time we stop ignoring." She looked at him, and for the first time in days, her expression softened. "Where do we start?" Ethan reached over and closed the album. With honesty, they didn't say more that night, but it was the beginning of a shift, small, tentative, but real. Later, just before midnight, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text had arrived on the burner phone he had left with Ms. Jolene. 3 words, "Thanks for trying." No name, no punctuation. But Ethan didn't need either. It was Mason, and he was still listening. The text stayed with Ethan for days. He had kept the prepaid phone on his nightstand, checking it occasionally without much hope for a follow-up. But the 3 words, "Thanks for trying," weren't just polite. They were a sign. Mason hadn't disappeared entirely. He was still paying attention, still weighing his choices. Ethan didn't want to push him. If Mason was like any of the other kids Ethan had worked with over the years, children caught between systems and silence, then pressure would only drive him further away. Instead, Ethan focused his attention elsewhere, returning to work with a quiet intensity. He went through his daily meetings, reviewed foundation reports, and caught up on messages from the advisory board. But beneath the surface of normalcy, his mind was still tracking invisible threads, replaying conversations, gestures, the glance Claire had given him after closing the photo album, and the walls that seemed to have begun slowly lowering between them. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, a habit they had not returned to in months. Claire turned from the counter with a casual observation. "Oh, by the way," she said, "I think there was something wrong with the dishwasher. I asked Rosa to take a look. She said she had her nephew try fixing it." "Her nephew?" Ethan asked, drying his hands. "Yeah," she said, "he does handyman work on the side." "What else did he check?" Claire shrugged. "Just the usual things. Maybe the thermostat once. And I think the car, a while ago." "The car?" "I asked him to check a noise I heard when I was backing out of the garage last month. He said it might be nothing. But I forgot to tell you." Ethan tried not to react too quickly. "Do you know his name?" "Julio, I think. Quiet kid, early 20s. He nodded and changed the subject, but the coincidence gnawed at him. He had never met Julio, and Claire had only mentioned Lucas, the neighborhood teen, as the one she asked to look at the car. Now, there was a second name, connected by casual errands and hallway conversations. It might have meant nothing, or it might have been the thread he had missed. The next morning, Ethan asked Rosa about her nephew. She seemed surprised but not defensive. "Julio? Oh, yes, he's good with tools. Very respectful. He helped me fix the back door once." "Did he check the car?" "He looked under the hood one day when Senora," Claire asked. "I think just the battery, maybe the brakes. He said something looked off and said she should take it to a shop." "When was this?" "Maybe 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry, Mr. Ethan. I thought she told you." No, it's fine. Thank you." So now there were 2 people who had supposedly checked the car, both under Claire's request, Lucas and Julio, and yet neither had left a note, reported an issue, or mentioned their inspection to Ethan directly. And then there was Mason, who had overheard something that made him believe danger was imminent. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood in the garage beside the family car, staring at it with a mix of frustration and suspicion. The mechanic had confirmed a dangerously low brake fluid level, but no signs of malicious tampering. Maybe it was poor maintenance. Maybe it was a quiet warning, ignored by 2 untrained pairs of eyes. Or maybe it was something else altogether. A pattern of events too subtle to call sabotage, but too strange to dismiss. Ethan called Claire from the garage. "Hey," he said, "do you remember exactly when Julio looked at the car?" There was a pause on the line. Not exactly. Maybe around the time you went on that overnight trip to Boston? I noticed a squeaking noise one morning. I asked him to just take a quick look while he was fixing the dishwasher, and he said, what? That I should take it in, but I forgot. Honestly, I didn't think it was serious. Ethan waited a second, measuring his words. "Why didn't you mention it earlier?" "I don't know. Things have been tense, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of something small. Do you think it's important?" "I'm not sure yet." Claire's voice softened. "You think someone meant for the brakes to fail?" "I think someone knew they were going to. That's what concerns me." That evening, as Ethan tried to settle his thoughts, he received another message on the burner phone. This time, it was longer. "Saw you near the mural. That place feels like old paper now. Everything's peeling." He typed back immediately. "You remembered it well. Your rocket was still there." No response came, but that small interaction gave Ethan a strange kind of peace. Mason hadn't cut him off. He was watching, listening, even reflecting, and something about that mural mattered deeply to him. 2 days later, Ethan returned to the church hoping to find Ms. Jolene. Instead, he found a volunteer named Kevin, a former social worker who had known Mason briefly during his early days in the foster system. Kevin remembered the boy's quiet defiance, the way he always stayed near the exits, never unpacked his things, never called anyone sir or ma'am. "He once told me," Kevin said, "that adults only make promises when they plan to leave, so he stopped listening." "Do you know if he's still staying nearby?" Kevin looked unsure. "He drifts, but he comes back here sometimes. I've seen him twice in the last week. Never stays long. Eats, leaves, like he's checking in without saying it." Ethan nodded. "If you see him again, would you give him something for me?" He left a small envelope, this time with a printed photo, a snapshot of the mural with Mason's name visible at the bottom, along with another handwritten note. You built something. It's still there. So, are you? That night back home, Ethan and Claire sat by the fire in the living room. Something they hadn't done in years. She was reading a book, legs curled under her, and he was sipping coffee, the burner phone resting silently on the side table. I saw Julio today, she said suddenly. He stopped by to fix Rosa's ceiling light. He asked if everything was okay with the car. What did you say? That was fine now, but the way he asked, it was strange. Like he was waiting for me to say something more. Ethan sat up slightly. What do you mean? Claire closed her book, like he was checking to see if you knew. The silence between them was sharp. Maybe he did find something wrong, Ethan said, but didn't want to alarm you. Or maybe he said something to someone else. Claire finished. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a suspicion. It was just a quiet recognition that too many pieces didn't fit. And now they were both starting to feel it. That night, as the city darkened outside their windows, Ethan turned once more to the burner phone. You're not alone, Mason. Not anymore. No reply came. But something had shifted, not just in the case, but in his home, in Claire, in himself. He wasn't looking for blame anymore. He was looking for truth. The next few days moved slower than usual, though Ethan kept himself occupied. There were board meetings to attend, updates from the foundation to review, and an upcoming city grant proposal to finalize. But even amid the controlled rhythm of professional obligations, his mind remained somewhere else, tracing the subtle web of coincidences, conversations, and unanswered questions that had defined the last week of his life. What had begun as a single, jarring moment in a garage had now unfolded into a quiet unraveling of assumptions. And while Mason remained elusive, Ethan had begun sensing a quiet shift, not just in the boy, but in himself and in the space between him and Claire. That Sunday morning, Claire lingered in the kitchen longer than usual. She had just returned from a yoga class and was scrolling through a recipe on her tablet. Sipping a smoothie, Ethan stood at the sink rinsing coffee mugs, the sound of running water masking his thoughts. There was something he wanted to ask for days, but each time the moment came, he pulled back, waiting, perhaps, for more certainty or maybe just more courage. But this time, the stillness in the room made it feel right. Claire, he said, drying his hands on a dish towel, can we sit for a moment? She looked up from the tablet, slightly surprised, but not uneasy. Sure. They moved to the breakfast nook, the morning sun casting a warm glow across the tile floor. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ethan placed the burner phone on the table between them. That's the phone I gave the boy, he began. Mason? She glanced at it. Has he contacted you again? A few times. Short messages. I think he wants to trust me, but he's cautious. He's been hurt. Claire nodded, waiting. He mentioned something. Ethan continued, that he overheard people near my car. One of them mentioned your name. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't look away. Instead, she exhaled, almost as if she'd expected the moment to come. I never meant to keep anything from you, she said quietly, but I was afraid you'd misunderstand. Try me? Claire looked down at her hands. A few months ago, I started feeling disconnected. From you, from the rhythm of our life. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even painful at first. Just distant. Like we were living alongside each other, not with each other. I didn't know what to do about it. So I filled the space with small things. Volunteering more, redecorating, asking for help around the house. That's when you asked Julio to help? Yes. He was respectful, helpful, and kind. I never invited anything inappropriate. But I think I was unconsciously enjoying the attention. I didn't see it clearly at the time. Ethan's voice was steady. Did he say anything to you that made you uncomfortable? She paused. Eventually, he started asking personal questions. If I was happy, if you were around much. I told him to stop. I felt guilty for not setting firmer boundaries earlier, but I never thought he'd do anything reckless. I never imagined he'd touch the car. Did he admit to it? No. I never asked. I didn't want to know. I thought if I ignored it, it would pass. Ethan leaned back, absorbing her words. I think Mason saw something, or heard something. I think he connected the dots better than either of us." Claire looked at him then, her expression soft with regret. "I never meant to let anything happen to you. Whatever Julio did, it wasn't at my request." "I believe you," Ethan said, and he meant it. There was no tremor in his voice, no suspicion in his eyes. For a long while, they sat in silence, the morning ticking gently forward. Then Claire reached for his hand. "I want us to find our way back, Ethan, whatever that takes." He nodded. "So do I." That afternoon, Ethan returned to the mural site. He brought a thermos of hot tea and a small stack of sketch pads. He sat on the same bench where he had imagined Mason before and waited, hoping the boy might return on his own. He stayed there for hours, watching as people passed by, some stopping to admire the faded wall, others barely glancing at it. But Mason never appeared. The next day, Ethan returned to Hope Haven, the shelter where Mason had once been seen. He met again with Kevin, the former social worker, who had an update. "Mason was here last night," Kevin said. "Didn't stay long. Said he was checking in for someone." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then he's still watching. He also left something for you." Kevin handed over a folded piece of paper. Inside was a pencil drawing, rough but detailed. It showed the mural again, this time from above, like it was being seen through the eyes of someone perched high on a rooftop. The figures at the bottom were clearer now. A man in a suit, a woman with long hair, and a small boy with a sketchbook. The rocket was still there, its smoke curling up into a sky filled with stars. Beneath the drawing, Mason had written, "Some things are worth rebuilding." Ethan folded the paper slowly, feeling something loosen inside his chest. He called Claire from outside the shelter. "Are you free tonight?" he asked. "I think I am. Let's make dinner together. Just us." That evening, as they chopped vegetables and stirred sauces side by side, the air between them felt lighter. There was no grand conversation, no need to pick at every detail. Just presence, just motion, just a shared understanding that something broken was slowly being mended. Not because of confrontation, but because of a quiet effort made over time. Before bed, Ethan checked the burner phone one last time. No new messages. But he knew Mason was still there, still listening. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was chasing shadows. He felt like he was finally beginning to see clearly. The following morning, Ethan woke early and lingered by the bedroom window, watching the pale light begin to soften the skyline. Claire was still asleep, her breathing slow and steady, the subtle rise and fall of her chest like a quiet rhythm grounding the room. The conversation from the previous day had left him feeling both clearer and unsettled. There were no accusations, no rage, no betrayal. Just honesty, which somehow made the truth more complex. Ethan didn't resent Claire. He understood her now better than he had in years. But understanding didn't erase the consequences of long-ignored distance. He left the house quietly and took the subway into the city. He hadn't told Claire where he was going, only that he had some things to follow up on. In his coat pocket, the sketch Mason had drawn remained neatly folded. He wasn't sure why he carried it. Maybe it was a reminder that the boy had not completely vanished. Or maybe it was a message waiting for a response he hadn't yet figured out how to give. By mid-morning, Ethan had returned to the Hope Haven shelter. Kevin greeted him with a nod, but didn't look optimistic. "No sign of him today," he said. "Sometimes he's gone for days." Ethan leaned on the front desk, scanning the entry log out of habit. "Do you know if he ever mentioned a specific place he sleeps, or where he goes when he disappears?" "He used to hang around the old rail yard," Kevin said. "East side past a bridge. It's been cleared out mostly, but a few kids still squat there. Dangerous, though. I'll take my chances." The walk to the rail yard was long and exposed, the late autumn wind cutting through his coat. Most of the buildings nearby had been abandoned for years. Boarded-up warehouses, graffiti-tagged shipping containers, piles of rusting machinery. But there were signs of life, too. Blankets stashed behind concrete blocks, scraps of cardboard forming makeshift beds, cigarette but still warm in a coffee tin. The world here was invisible to most. but Mason had lived in it long enough to know every hiding place. Ethan called out a few times, but got no answer. He tried not to look threatening, but he knew how a man in clean clothes with expensive shoes looked in a place like this. Eventually, a thin girl emerged from behind a burned-out van. She looked to be around 14, her hoodie pulled tight around her face. "You looking for someone?" she asked flatly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "His name is Mason." "Maybe I've heard of him," she said, arms crossed. "What's it to you?" "He helped me. I owe him. That's all." She eyed him carefully. "He doesn't like people owing him." "I figured." She hesitated, then pointed toward the edge of the lot. "He hasn't been here in a couple days. Last I saw him, he was asking around for someone named Ethan." "That's me." Her expression didn't change. "Then maybe he's avoiding you." "Why would he?" "He said you were different. But sometimes different still means disappointment." Ethan didn't answer. The girl disappeared back into the shadows without another word. That afternoon, he returned to the church. Ms. Jolene wasn't there, but one of the volunteers said Mason had stopped by briefly the day before. He had eaten, sat in the back pew for 20 minutes, and left before anyone could talk to him. No message this time. No sketch. Just silence. Feeling the trail go cold again, Ethan tried the community center next. The old photos still hung on the hallway walls. Children smiling during food drives, art classes, basketball tournaments. A world of hope pinned in time. He studied the one with Mason again, tracing the boy's features, wondering what that version of him had expected from life 2 years ago. Had he already given up by then? Or was he still waiting for someone to prove him wrong? One of the center coordinators, a middle-aged woman named Talia, approached Ethan in the hallway. "You've been looking for him, haven't you?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "You've seen him?" "Not in a while. But he made an impression. Quiet but sharp, like he was always 2 steps ahead of whatever was going on. I think he still is." She walked with him toward the back exit. He used to draw in the corner by the vending machines. Every afternoon. One day I asked him what he was working on, and he said, "A map out of here." I thought it was just a sketch. But now I wonder if he meant something more. Ethan looked at her, intrigued. "Did he ever show you the map?" "No, but I bet he still has it." That evening, Ethan returned home just as the sun dipped behind the skyline. Claire was in the study, going over paperwork. She looked up when he walked in, and though she didn't ask where he'd been, her eyes carried the question. "I went looking for him," Ethan said, setting down his bag. "Thought I might catch a lead." "Any luck?" "Just near misses. Like he's trying to be found but not caught." Claire stood and walked over to him. "You're doing more for him than most ever would." "I'm doing what I wish someone had done sooner. Maybe for both of us." They stood in silence for a moment, and then she leaned in and rested her head against his shoulder. That night, as Ethan prepared for bed, the burner phone buzzed. "I was there, saw you at the mural, but I couldn't stay. Too many people, too many things I can't fix." Ethan responded immediately. "You don't have to fix anything. Just talk to me." No reply came, but the message was enough. Mason had been close again, watching, lingering, perhaps afraid not just of being found, but of what it might mean to be wanted. Ethan lay in bed for a long time, the screen of the phone glowing dimly beside him. He wasn't chasing the boy anymore. He was waiting for him to stop running. The cold came in early that week, sharp and sudden. By Monday morning, the city wore a quiet layer of frost, and the wind seemed to whistle through alleyways like a reminder of things that had been left unsaid. Ethan stood on the balcony outside his home office, his breath clouding the air. The burner phone rested in his pocket like a lifeline, but there had been no new messages since Mason's last hesitant words. "Too many things I can't fix." That sentence played over in Ethan's mind, not just as a lament from a frightened boy, but as something uncomfortably familiar. Maybe it wasn't just Mason speaking those words. Maybe Ethan had been living inside them himself. Inside the house, Claire was on a video call with her sister, their voices muffled behind the study door. The sound of distant laughter reminded Ethan of how rare it had become in their home. Natural, easy laughter. He hadn't noticed it fading. He had simply gotten used to its absence. By mid-morning, he found himself standing in the center of the large conference room at the Foundation's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, and the space was quiet except for the low hum of the city outside. Files were neatly stacked across the long table. Project updates, funding proposals, community grant summaries. But Ethan couldn't focus. He had built this organization on the idea of giving back, of changing lives through structure, access, and opportunity. Yet, over time, the structure had become the focus, not the people it was supposed to serve. Mason had reminded him of that. It wasn't guilt Ethan felt. It was something more complex. A reckoning, perhaps a recognition that while he had given money, time, and influence, he had stopped giving presence, real attention, the kind that Mason's three-word warning had demanded, the kind that changed people. He left the building without touching a single file. Instead of going home, Ethan rode the subway to the old library branch on the east side. It was a modest building, often overlooked in favor of the sleeker locations downtown, but he remembered attending a talk there years ago, one about youth mentorship and how storytelling could restore dignity to those who felt invisible. Inside, the space was warm and quiet. He wandered past the rows of books until he found a small community board near the entrance. On it were handwritten flyers, free tutoring, food bank schedules, local art classes. One flyer caught his eye. It was for a youth writing workshop, open to teens aged 12 to 17. It was hosted by a woman named Mary Ann, whom Ethan remembered vaguely as a former teacher-turned-volunteer. He found her seated near the back of the reading room, sorting through a stack of poetry journals. When he introduced himself and explained why he was there, she didn't hesitate. "Mason," she said. "Yes, he came once." Didn't say much. Listened a lot. Drew in his notebook while the others read. He didn't come back. "Do you know why?" He seemed like he didn't want to need anyone, like he was daring us to make the first mistake. Ethan nodded. "That sounds right. I told him once that stories help you remember who you are, even when the world forgets." He just said, "What if I don't want to remember?" Later that day, Ethan visited the Foundation's Youth Center in Harlem unannounced. He sat with one of the caseworkers, a man named Brian who had been with the organization since its early days. "You look different," Brian said as they walked the hallway lined with student art. "Different how?" "Like someone who's finally seeing it up close again. The struggle. I think I stopped seeing it for too long." They sat in one of the multipurpose rooms, surrounded by stacks of donated winter coats and backpacks. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, "that maybe the Foundation needs a shift. Less focus on large campaigns, more one-on-one initiatives, mentorships, family support units, rebuilding trust, not just systems." Brian smiled. "You sound like the guy I used to work for 10 years ago. I want to meet him again." Ethan stayed at the center the rest of the afternoon. He read with children, helped distribute supplies, and listened to volunteers share stories of frustration and hope. The small details grounded him. The untied shoelace on a 6-year-old's boot, the way a girl corrected her friend's spelling on a handmade sign, the cracked voice of a teen trying to read aloud for the first time. These moments didn't fix anything, but they mattered. They reminded him of why he had started it all. That evening, Ethan returned home to find Claire in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. She looked at him and tilted her head. "You smell like crayons and sweat." "I was at the center," he said. "Spent the day volunteering." She smiled gently. "I miss that version of you." He walked over and kissed her cheek. "So did I." They ate together in the quiet, the warmth of food and their shared presence enough to make the silence feel full rather than hollow. After dinner, Ethan sat in the living room with a notebook. He began to write, not emails, not strategy documents, but thoughts, observations, questions he hadn't dared ask himself before. One page he tore out and folded. Then he picked up the burner phone and typed another message to Mason. "I spent today listening to people. I think I finally understand what you were trying to say. Not just about the car, about being seen." He didn't expect a reply right away, but within an hour, the screen lit up. "I didn't want you to die. That's all. Didn't know what else to do." Ethan stared at the message, his chest tightening. "That was more than enough," he replied. "You saved my life. I want to help you build yours." There was no answer that night, but Ethan didn't need one to know they had taken a step. He sat back, the room dark around him, the only light coming from the message still glowing on the phone. He was no longer chasing Mason. He was showing him there was something worth walking toward. By the middle of the week, the shift in Ethan's focus was no longer subtle. He arrived earlier than usual at the foundation, dressed in casual clothes, not the tailored suits that had once defined his presence. His office door remained open all day. He walked through the building talking to staff, helping rearrange supplies, even sitting in on case review meetings, something he hadn't done in years. The whispers among employees weren't skeptical. They were curious. Some wondered if something had happened. Others simply said, "He's back." But Ethan wasn't doing it for show. The change was real and deliberate, and not just at work. At home, he and Claire had begun talking again. Really talking. Not about surface matters or scheduling logistics, but about who they had become and how far they had drifted. There were no dramatic revelations, no sudden, tearful confessions, just quiet moments of truth. Claire admitting how often she had felt invisible, Ethan acknowledging that he had taken too much for granted. They weren't mending something broken. They were rebuilding something forgotten, brick by brick, with care. And at the center of this quiet transformation stood Mason, still silent, still distant, but undeniably present in Ethan's mind and increasingly in his heart. One evening, Claire found Ethan in the living room, reviewing grant proposals for the shelter near Mason's old mural. She sat beside him, holding 2 cups of tea. "You're thinking of rebuilding that place?" she asked. "Not rebuilding," he said. "Restoring. I want to make it part of the community again." She sipped her tea, then set it down. "Then let me help." "You're sure?" "I was on the sidelines long enough. If we're finding our way back, it needs to be through something that matters." So they began planning together. The project evolved quickly, from a simple refurbishment into a complete initiative, a mentorship hub for at-risk youth, mental health support, arts and creative expression programs, a mobile clinic partnership. Claire offered to coordinate the design and logistics, using her network through museum to bring in local artists and community educators. Ethan reached out to his foundation partners, city contacts, and former grant recipients. They called it the Haven Project. Word spread fast. Volunteers signed up. Donations increased. And amid the energy of renewal, Ethan felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose, not tied performance, but the connection. But the best part came quietly. One afternoon, as Ethan reviewed mural restoration plans inside the old shelter building, a voice behind him said simply, "You really meant it." He turned. Mason stood in the doorway, his hoodie damp from the rain, his face thinner than before but more open. His hands were tucked in his pockets, but his eyes no longer avoided Ethan's. "I told you I would," Ethan replied. Mason looked around the room, now stripped to the bones of construction, exposed beams, buckets of paint, stacks of tiles. "You're fixing it up." "With help." Mason stepped farther inside. "You remember that old window in the corner? The one with the chipped glass?" "I do. I used to sit under it when the sun hit just right. Made everything look gold, even if it was just for a minute. We're replacing it with a skylight," Ethan said. "But we're keeping the frame." Mason looked at him, something between suspicion and hope flickering in his expression. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "I just didn't think anyone would actually care that much." "I'm not trying to prove anything," Ethan replied. "I just want to keep listening." They sat together on 2 overturned buckets. No agenda, no pressure. Ethan asked about his sketches. Mason asked about the construction plans. When Mason mentioned wanting help with painting, Ethan didn't hesitate. "Let's make you part of the team," he said. "Officially." Mason's eyebrows rose. "Like the job?" "Like a role. One you design." The boy didn't answer right away, but his smile, small, almost imperceptible, was real. Over the next few days, Mason began showing up regularly. He worked quietly, often alone, but he stayed. He painted. helped rearrange supplies, even sketched layout ideas for the common area walls. One afternoon, he handed Claire a folded page with rough illustrations. "These are just ideas," he said. "Maybe for the upstairs hallway." Claire unfolded the page and studied the designs, abstract shapes merging into silhouettes of children climbing ladders, reaching for books, stars, and music notes. "These are beautiful," she said. "They're just drawings. They're more than that. Would you like to lead the mural work upstairs?" He stared at her. "Like, really lead it?" "Really?" He nodded slowly. "Then I'll need more paint." Claire laughed. "Consider it done." By the end of the week, Mason had unofficially become a core part of the team. He still slept in different places, never staying long anywhere, but now he carried a key to the shelter building. And for the first time, he began joining meals at the church, even talking to a few of the other kids from the neighborhood. One evening, Ethan found him sketching in the old reading room, where dusty shelves had been cleared for a future library. "You ever think about school?" Ethan asked gently. "Not much," Mason replied. "Didn't go much, either. We could look into programs. Something flexible, maybe art-focused." Mason looked up from his sketchbook. "You think that's for me?" "I think you've already proven it is." That night, Ethan brought the idea to Claire. She immediately contacted a friend who worked in a private grant-funded education initiative for non-traditional students. Within 2 days, a meeting was scheduled. Mason didn't commit, but he agreed to go, and that was enough. Ethan sat with Claire on their porch that night, listening to the city hum around them. "I didn't expect any of this," she said softly. "Neither did I. But it feels good. It feels like beginning again." They didn't need to say more. And for Ethan, who had once lived surrounded by structure, precision, and certainty, the quiet unpredictability of the moment was more fulfilling than any plan he had ever made. The following Saturday began with unexpected quiet. The construction team working on the Haven project had taken the weekend off, and the once bustling shelter sat in a temporary lull, its skeletal frame echoing with memories more than movement. Ethan arrived shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, a thermos of coffee in one hand, and a canvas bag with Mason's name scribbled on the side in the other. It had become his routine now. Check in early, clean up stray tools, plan logistics of the week. But today felt different. Stiller than usual. At the back of the shelter, the small kitchen, once water damaged and unfit for use, had been cleared and partially repainted. It now served as a makeshift break room for volunteers, and was where Ethan found Claire organizing notebooks, art supplies, and sealed food containers. "He hasn't come in yet," she said, without needing to explain who. Ethan nodded. He said he might go to the East Mural site today. Sketch in the morning light. "Do you think he'll show up later?" "If he doesn't," Ethan replied, "I'll wait again tomorrow." The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the kind that comes when people are working in harmony, focused on something beyond themselves. Their conversations had become steady, even warm, and the weeks of shared action had started to rebuild more than just a shelter. Around noon, Ethan received a text from one of the church volunteers. Just a photo. It was of Mason, standing near the serving line at a weekend community lunch. He wasn't alone. There were other teens beside him, laughing at something someone had said. Mason wasn't looking at the camera, but his shoulders were relaxed. The edges of a smile ghosted his lips. A minute later, another message followed. "He's doing okay. Just quiet." Ethan tucked the phone back into his pocket and stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The street was quiet, dust drifting in faint spirals along the curb. Across the road, the neighborhood pharmacy had put out a sidewalk sign advertising flu shots. A boy on a bike rode past with a paper bag balanced on the handlebars. The world, in all its ordinary rhythm, carried on. Then, just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Mason appeared. He came in through the back gate, backpack slung low on his shoulders, hair still damp as if he'd washed it moments earlier. He walked slowly through the entryway and stopped when he saw Ethan sitting on the edge of an overturned crate. "You're early," Mason said. "I figured I'd beat the paint fumes." Mason dropped his bag by the door. Claire here? In the kitchen. She's sorting supplies. He nodded, then pulled out a roll of paper from his bag. I have new sketches for the second floor. Thought maybe we could use the tree motif. Ethan stood and took the roll, unfastening the twine and spreading the paper across a nearby table. The design was complex of fluid, intertwining branches stretching across walls and curving up to the ceiling, forming canopies that held scenes of books, music, sports, and dreams. "This is amazing, Mason," Ethan said sincerely. "It's just lines. You guys are the ones actually building something." "No, you are. You're building something here too." Mason looked away, but only for a second. "I've been thinking," Ethan continued, "about the way you've shown up for all of this. You could disappear again if you wanted to, but you keep coming back." Mason shrugged. "Maybe I don't want to disappear anymore." "You don't have to," Ethan said. "We're not here to rescue you. We're here to walk with you." Claire emerged from the kitchen then, wiping her hands on a towel. When she saw Mason, her face lit up with a quiet ease. "I was hoping you'd stop by," she said. "I brought the mural sketch." Perfect timing. We were just about to talk design layout. The rest of the afternoon passed in the steady hum of collaboration. The three of them, Mason, Ethan, and Claire, measured wall dimensions, tested paint shades, debated color tones for the tree roots. Mason sketched directly onto drywall in chalk, marking outlines that would later guide the full painting process. The once cold building now pulsed with purpose. Later that evening, the three of them sat on the back steps of the shelter, sipping hot chocolate from mismatched mugs. The streetlights flickered to life, casting soft golden glows onto the sidewalk. Ethan turned to Mason. "What would you think about giving a short talk at the shelter's reopening? Nothing formal, just sharing your design story." Mason nearly choked on his drink. "A speech? More like a conversation. I don't really do crowds. You'd be talking to people who already believe in you." Mason was quiet for a while, watching a pair of pigeons flutter onto the telephone wire above. "I'll think about it," he said. They stayed like that for a long time, watching the city slip into twilight. As the chill deepened, Claire stood and headed inside to finish her notes. Ethan remained beside Mason, who had pulled out a worn sketch pad and began doodling under the soft glow of the porch light. "You ever think about what comes next?" Ethan asked. Mason didn't look up. "Like tomorrow? Like next year? 5 years from now?" The boy's pencil paused for just a second. "I never used to. Do you now?" "I'm starting to." Ethan didn't press. Instead, he sat with him, shoulder to shoulder, letting the silence speak. And for the first time, there was no weight in it. No fear. No waiting. Mason was here. And this time, it felt like he intended to stay. In the weeks that followed Mason's return to the shelter project, the rhythm of the work shifted from construction to coordination. The skeleton of the building was now complete. Paint covered the once exposed beams. Electrical systems had been updated. The central skylight was installed, and the scent of fresh wood and clean walls replaced the musty air of months past. What remained now was the soul of the place, the personality, the imprint of those it was meant to serve. Mason became a central figure in that transformation. By the first Monday of December, he had arrived at the shelter before both Ethan and Claire. When they walked in, he was already working, brush in hand, painting one of the branches from his tree mural design. It now extended across the length of the upstairs hallway, curling gently around corners, guiding the eyes toward scenes that Mason had imagined and now brought to life. Children reading beneath the boughs, hands reaching for constellations. A small figure looking out over a city skyline, not unlike their own. Mason didn't speak much while painting, but his focus said everything. Ethan and Claire gave him the space to lead. Volunteers stepped in only when he asked for help. He taught them how to blend the colors, how to layer the images for depth, how to work without overcorrecting. There was an odd comfort in watching the boy who had once lived on the edges of every system now give quiet orders with certainty and calm. One morning, as Ethan arrived carrying breakfast sandwiches, he found Mason sitting on the roof outside the staff room window, sketchbook on his lap. He had climbed out to catch the light from the east And now he stared at the rising sun like someone not just watching the day begin, but asking it to continue. Ethan opened the window and stepped through onto the flat surface beside him. Cold out here. Mason nodded. Sky is clean today. You thinking about adding something to the mural? Maybe, or maybe just thinking. They sat together in silence for a few moments. Claire got you a meeting, Ethan said, with the school art mentorship program. No grades, no pressure, just a portfolio and support. I know, she told me yesterday. You gonna go? Mason shrugged. Probably. You don't have to decide anything today, but they're excited to meet you. The boy turned a page in his sketchbook. I don't know how to do school, not like other kids. You don't have to be like anyone else, Ethan said. You just have to keep showing up. I used to think if I stayed in one place too long, I'd get left behind. And now, I think maybe I got tired of leaving first. Ethan didn't reply. He just reached over and took the extra sandwich from the bag, placing it on the ledge between them. Later that day, Mason met with the program director of the mentorship school. The meeting was short, informal, and filled with quiet awe as the director flipped through Mason's sketchbook. The boy had brought only 5 pages, but each one spoke volumes. Drawings of cities layered over dreamscapes, faces drawn with eyes too old for their frames, shelters turning into homes with light pouring out of open windows. The director didn't ask many questions. She simply said, "When can you start?" Mason agreed to begin part-time the following month, easing into a new rhythm without abandoning the work he'd begun at the shelter. Meanwhile, Ethan and Claire's dynamic deepened. In between meetings and mural discussions, they found time for themselves again, walking to their favorite cafe on Sundays, attending a local gallery opening, even hosting a quiet dinner at their home with 2 of the volunteers. The tension that had once existed between them now lived in the past, replaced by a shared sense of rebuilding, not just of their marriage, but of their identities, their legacy. One evening, after locking up the shelter, Ethan and Claire sat alone in the nearly completed reading room. It was furnished now, warm chairs, rugs, lamps, and shelves already filling with donated books. "I forgot how much I loved doing this kind of work," Claire said softly. "Because it felt like work before. Because it felt like pretending. Now it feels like living." Ethan reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. "I was thinking," she said, "after the reopening, maybe we step back from the foundation a little. Not quit, just give the team more room to lead. Focus more on ground-level work." "You mean more shelters? More murals?" "I mean more life. Like this. Real." Ethan smiled. "I'm in." By the final week before reopening, the space had transformed entirely. The front entrance now bore a new sign, handcrafted by a local artist, The Haven. Below it, in smaller letters, it read, "Where light finds its way back in." Inside, the rooms buzzed with quiet purpose. Community leaders walked through with clipboards, setting up schedules for free workshops. Teachers offered to lead weekend reading sessions. Volunteers rehearsed the opening ceremony, which would be modest but heartfelt. There would be a meal, a few speeches, and a gallery walk of Mason's mural and the children's artwork created during the build. Mason, despite weeks of protests, finally agreed to say a few words. Not a speech, just a moment to thank those who had helped. He wrote and rewrote his lines on scrap paper, practicing quietly in corners when he thought no one noticed. But Ethan noticed, and he was proud. The night before the reopening, Mason stayed late, adding one final detail to the mural. A small boy sitting on a bench, sketchbook open, a man beside him. The skyline ahead of them was unfinished, left an outline. Above them, in the leaves of the mural tree, Mason had painted one word, possible, as he finished. He looked at Ethan, who stood watching from the far end of the hallway. "It's not perfect," Mason said. "No," Ethan replied, walking toward him. "It's better. It's true." And in that moment, as the lights dimmed and the building quieted for the night, the boy who had once only whispered warnings had become someone else entirely. Not a problem to be solved, but a future finally unfolding. The reopening ceremony for the Haven took place on a Saturday afternoon beneath a bright winter sky. The air was cold but dry, and the sunlight poured in through the new skylight and tall windows, bouncing softly off freshly painted walls. Despite the low temperatures outside, the atmosphere inside the shelter was warm and vibrant. Chairs were arranged neatly in the main hall, folding tables lined with food trays donated by neighborhood restaurants, and artwork hung from string lights stretched across the ceiling beams. The room filled slowly at first, but soon families, volunteers, city officials, and members of the community arrived, most carrying dishes or wrapped books, and some just offering open hands and long hugs. Mason arrived just after 1 o'clock, his hands tucked into the pockets of a new jacket, a gift from Claire, one he had almost refused to accept. He made his way through the crowd without drawing attention, his eyes scanning every detail. He didn't want to miss anything. He had already seen the space in its final form, but now, seeing it alive, with voices and laughter echoing down the corridors he had once walked in silence, felt entirely different. Claire found him by the entrance, where he stood beside the new sign. "Nervous?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. She smiled. "You'll do great. Just speak from here." She touched her fingers gently to his chest, where his heart was beating fast. "No one here expects anything more." Mason nodded, then took a deep breath. The ceremony began with a short speech from the local councilwoman, who praised a public-private partnership and the transformation of the abandoned building into a home for hope. A music teacher from a nearby school played a soft piano melody, while a group of children displayed a handmade banner that read "Welcome to the Haven. We see you." Then it was Ethan's turn. He walked in front of the room, wearing a modest blazer, no tie, and the same calm expression that had replaced his once constant corporate polish. Years ago, he began, I stood in a different kind of space. It had walls and doors and programs. But it didn't have this. It didn't have people who saw each other, really saw. This place started as a renovation project. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. It became personal. It became ours. He glanced toward the back of the room where Mason stood, leaning slightly against the doorway. I owe a great deal to a boy who reminded me that warnings can be gifts, that sometimes the clearest truths come not from those who shout, but from those who whisper. He changed my life, and now I'd like him to speak for himself. The room went quiet as Mason approached the front. He didn't carry notes. His hands were no longer in his pockets, and he didn't fidget with the hem of his shirt or look for an escape. He stood tall, not defiant, just present. "I didn't think I'd be here," he began, his voice even but quiet. "Not just here at the shelter. I mean, here, in a place where I was supposed to belong." He paused, eyes moving over the faces in the crowd. Some familiar, some not. "A while ago, I told someone that I didn't want anyone getting hurt. That was why I spoke up. But I think maybe that wasn't the whole reason. I think I spoke up because I wanted to see if anyone would listen." He took another breath, and someone did. Not just one person. A few. And that changed everything. He gestured toward the mural behind him. The tree with open branches and golden light seeping through painted leaves. "This wall," he said, "was once just another broken place. Now it's something that holds things, memories, people, stories. And I think that's what we're all trying to be. Something that holds things without breaking." There was silence, then applause, sincere and slow, then rising. Mason gave a small nod and returned to his seat. After the speeches, the crowd flowed through the building on a guided walk. In each room, pieces of the mural told fragments of Mason's story, but also stories of others. Sketch scenes of city corners, sleeping children and quiet heroes. On one hallway wall, beside the word possible, a small bronze plaque had been mounted. It read, "In honor of those who speak softly, see clearly and choose to stay." That night, after the guests had left and the lights had dimmed, Ethan and Claire sat on the back steps of the shelter, Mason between them, sharing leftover cookies and sipping warm cider. The neighborhood was quiet again. The shelter would be closed the next day for final staff preparations, and then it would open fully, 7 days a week, with rotating services and permanent staff. "You still thinking about that school?" Ethan asked Mason. "Yeah," Mason replied. "But I want to stay involved here too. Maybe mentor some of the younger ones. Help them with art Or just listen? You'd be great at that, Claire said. Mason smiled, not wide, but real. I'm not going anywhere for a while, he said. Feels like I'm just starting. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed Mason a small object, a key. What's this? Your own key to the Haven. Thought it might be time. Mason turned the key in his hand, nodding. No tears, no dramatics, just understanding. That night, as Ethan and Claire returned home, the city felt quieter. Not empty, not distant, just at peace. The wind rustled the trees. The buildings shimmered in the lamplight, and their steps were slow but sure. Inside their home, Claire paused at the entrance, turning toward Ethan. Did you ever think this would come from a boy in a parking lot? Ethan shook his head. I thought he was warning me. Turns out, he was inviting me to wake up. They stood there for a moment longer, not needing to say anything else. Back at the Haven, Mason sat alone in the reading room, sketching. The building creaked softly in the wind. Outside, the streetlights buzzed. He drew until the page was full. Then he turned it, started a new one, and kept drawing. Not because he had to, but because now, for the first time, he could. And in that quiet space, in a room rebuilt with care, the boy who once walked alone through the city's silence was no longer lost. He was home,